I think it's so necessary. I mean, particularly right now, I think it's always necessary because we are so far been stripped and so far pushed away. I mean, even my family members in Nigeria, the research that I'm doing on like Igbo mythologies, Dogon mythologies, but specifically even the Igbo ones, my Igbo family members do not know these myths. So even our families, literally who grew up in Nigeria, do not know our own stories of origin as a people. All of it makes me so excited because I know that I'm having an opportunity to share the stories and mythologies of my ancestors. And so it really gives me a sense of mission and drive to keep producing the work and to keep finding new avenues through film, through additional media, to immerse audiences in these divine stories that we contain within ourselves and that connect us to our ancestors and to the origin of the universe.
This podcast explores the mystery of relatedness as an organizing principle of the universe and of our lives.
We're trying to catch a glimpse of connections beyond color, continent, country, or kinship. And we're going to do this through science, mysticism, spirituality, and the creative arts.
I'm Donny Bryant.
I'm Barbara Holmes, and this is The Cosmic We.
Our guest today is Mikael Owunna, a self-described queer Nigerian, Swedish-American photographer and engineer based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Mikael is also a Fulbright Scholar and graduate of Duke University with dual degrees in biomedical engineering and photography. Mikael, welcome to the podcast.
It's an honor and a pleasure, very much so.
Mikael, I'm fascinated by how your work explores various types of interconnections and intersections, speaking to the unique area of identity formation. Today, for a little bit, I want you to tell us a little bit about your story of finding your voice.
While I was at Duke, I double majored in biomedical engineering and history, actually. And while I was studying history, the focus of my work was really around identity formation. So I did a number of research projects that were also connected to, I guess, also in a tangential way to my own personal experiences and struggles with identity. So the projects that I worked on while I was at Duke focused around, for example, the formation of the colored identity in South Africa as like a buffer class and caste system there. I also looked at the formation of and reformation of indigenous identities in the United States under the pressure of epidemic disease and genocidal violence, and how those also reformed different ethnic formations. Also the formation of whiteness and white identities with like white immigrants coming in and then becoming white, right? The Irish, the Italian, et cetera. So I was always really curious about that space while I was at Duke. And I was drawn to that specifically and also entered into photography due to the tension I was feeling between my queer identity and my African identity. And so when I was a freshman at Duke, actually, we would go back to Nigeria every Christmas. And that Christmas, we went back my freshman year, I was put through a series of ceremonies due to my sexuality to kind of drive the gay out of me. And after that experience, I fell into a spiral of a lot of anxiety and depression because I didn't feel like I had a right to exist. And I was also told that this is not our culture, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was very much a journey for me to rediscover what it meant to be African, what is actual African culture, how's that rooted in mysticism, et cetera. And it began like a few months after that experience at the end of my freshman year when I was headed to actually study at Oxford for a summer. And one of my friends said, we should get a camera before we go. And I picked up a camera and I felt like I found my voice again. Things clicked and I began working doing photography as a hobby that then really grew into this career. So it was kind of also all happening at the same time. A lot of the curiosity about identity, it connected to some of my historical research I was doing while at Duke, and also my own personal experiences in coming into photography as like creative outlet for myself.
Wow.
When I first encountered your work, I lost my breath. I really hadn't understood how deeply I had absorbed negativity around Black and brown bodies. And when I saw your work, I saw this celestial opening and unveiling. It was as if I could see an inner map of who we really were. And It was an exciting moment. And I know a lot of people have told you that. But when you're doing this work, what is it that you want us to see? What do you want the observer to see?
Wow, that means so much, Barbara, because your work is so foundational and so incredible. As I was mentioning, actually, right before this, your work has been cited by one of my key collaborators around my project. And Dr. Marcus Redd wrote an essay, Astro Black Mythology, about Sun Ra's conception of Astro Black mythology, right? Yeah. And within that, which is also, I guess, connected into my response about what I hope viewers take away from the work, my Infinite Essence series, where there are these celestial black bodies that are glowing in the darkness. Within the context of Astro Black mythology, Sun Ra was positing, a few different pieces, right? So Astro, we can think of astrology, our connection to astrological bodies. Mm-hmm. Black, right? So in terms of black, we can think about the primordial blackness from which all life emerges, right? So this is the blackness of outer space at the very outset of existence, right? So this is a blackness as this divine cosmic principle of the universe that transcends all life. Also, this connects to the blackness of the womb, the blackness of the deep ocean. So blackness as a generative force. And that also connects us also to ancient African histories and mythologies, because within ancient Egypt, ancient Egyptians referred to themselves as their nation as Kemet, meaning the black land. So thinking about, again, blackness and this connection that also connects us to our ancestors and to the future. And so Astro, the cosmic piece, black, this primordial blackness, and then mythology. Because I think in terms of even thinking about art and artistic practice, when we think about it from an indigenous African lens, art was not this separate piece. So people think, I describe being an engineer and an artist, and people will be like, oh, well, that's so different. But within African indigenous religions and societies and mysticism, mythology was a system of knowledge that was used to divine human consciousness by integrating art, science, and religion. And so they were all worked together to divine and expand our collective consciousness. And so I hope that through my work, it's kind of grounded in this practice of Astro Black mythology that connects us to the primordial blackness, that celestial origin, blackness as a divine cosmic principle of the universe, and also helps divine and expand our collective consciousness.
Wow.
I think, Mikael, what's amazing about, to me, and as someone who is fairly new to your work, and what has inspired me is that it allows one to reimagine what has previously been articulated as negative or dark or unvaluable, right? Or something not to be appreciated. And you, in a very creative way, you reimagine, as you talks about dark matter, right? Something that you could not see, but is very real and present and valuable and significant. And one of the questions that I want to ask you is how has your, you speak a little bit about your upbringing and how that informed, but what other experiences kind of help bring about this understanding of transcendence and how does your work, particularly your project, your more recent projects that you're doing on the Infinite Essence, and how some of that work, how does that represent your journey? How does your journey influence that work of taking something that was previously seen as negative or not significant, but reimagine that and displaying how the universal essence of that particular thing is in fact valuable to the world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. And for me, I see it actually being traced back to my previous body of work. So prior to working on Infinite Essence, I began Infinite Essence in 2016, working on it between 2016 and the present. So I'm still working on the project. Prior to that, I would begin, and I was constantly working on a documentary series on LGBT African immigrants. And so titled Limitless Africans, I traveled to 10 different countries across North America, Europe, and the Caribbean. And I photographed and interviewed 50 LGBTQ African immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. And with that body of work, I was seeking to also kind of, quote unquote, build community amongst other LGBT Africans, trying to return back to that source that had brought me to photography in the first place, that tension between my queer identity and my African identity, and trying to reclaim what it meant to be African and queer, right? One of the pieces that happened along the way was the unveiling of pre-colonial African history. And in that context, I began learning about, for example, the work of Malidoma Somé. And Malidoma Somé, of course, Dr. Barbara Holmes knows. So, Malidoma Somé, the spiritualist from Burkina Faso, he described in an article in the mid 1990s the role of gay people within traditional African societies as the gatekeepers to the spirit world. Wow. And so within traditional African societies, people we would now identify as being LGBTQ were not vilified. We were the shamans, we were the mystics, we were the diviners, we were the healers, and the warrior leaders who helped mitigate the gates between dimensions. And so we were central in all of our societies until colonialism, like both Christian, Islamic Christian colonialism, and the transformation of our ideas of what it meant to be African. And so that project for me introduced this space of thinking about myself and my work as gatekeeping and thinking about my role as like an artist within that realm. So that started building my curiosity around African spirituality, indigenous knowledge systems, and which then led into the Infinite Essence series. Because as I was thinking about the Infinite Essence series and trying to wrestle with these images, because I kept seeing all of these images of Black people being shot and killed. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to think about how could I transfigure our bodies into the cosmic vessels that they are. And I grounded that within African knowledge systems to do so. So that began with my previous body of work, kind of working with queer African identities, but then led into an exploration of additional knowledge systems that have then really transformed my own perspective about myself, my life, my practice, and the work that I do.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think one of the more important parts about Infinite Essence is that it's tied to African mythologies, and you name them. And you spoke of Malidoma Somé. There is this story he tells of his grandfather dying in a white colonial hospital, and they put the African whisk in his hand and they walk him home because they have to do all the funeral services. And so for African Americans who are trying to assimilate, there has been this desire to get rid of the mythology. We want to be like the colonists. We want to be able to say we achieved. We discarded that. And we've discarded something, I think, that is so important, that's captured along with photographs, is connections to mythology. So how do the mythologies of the Igbo people help with what you're doing?
Yeah, I think it has been very, very important point. So, I mean, it's been very transformational for me. So even when I was trying to begin the Infinite Essence work and understand the visual language for the series, I spent months actually testing many different processes. And so I began by trying light painting, which is when you set up a camera on a long exposure and you run around with lights. People kind of do it at weddings where they do the sparklers and they write like, I love you and stuff. So I was trying to do that, create these energetic auras, but it didn't illuminate the bodies. I then tried projectors where I would project onto the bodies these nebulae and oceanic forms, but then it blew out the bodies, and the bodies were not just transformed. The entire space was transformed. And so while I was trying to understand the visual language, I actually returned to the work of Chinua Achebe, the Igbo novelist.
Right. And
Chinua Achebe, in one of his essays, described the role of one of the Igbo spiritual bodies, because there are 8 spiritual bodies. And so one of the spiritual bodies that we contain is the chi. And while trying to describe what the chi is, which is very, very difficult to do, Chinua Achebe said that, or is our chi one ray of the infinite essence of the sun? And so that's actually where the source for the title came from, because I sat with that and I was thinking about, okay, our chi, our spirit, one of our spiritual bodies is connected to a celestial body. And from there, I was thinking about like magic that was kind of captured within some video games that I've been watching, like Final Fantasy. And I was looking at that, and I was thinking about Chinua Achebe's work. And then I literally heard a voice that was saying, put the sparkles onto the body. And from there, I continued on that path. And so it began with that. And then now each of the pieces that I have reference specific myths from the Igbo in Nigeria and the Dogon in Mali, which have such a well-documented cosmology, because I think by connecting ourselves, again, in terms of Astro-Black mythology, by rooting ourselves in mythology, African mythologies, we connect ourselves to the origins of the universe. We connect ourselves beyond Blackness as this really flat socio-political construct to Blackness as a divine cosmic principle of the universe that creates and generates all life.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I want to say I'm glad you mentioned that. I in doing some research, particularly about African spirituality and the concept of the chi, I asked a colleague of mine here in Michigan, and who is Igbo, and so I said, hey, tell me a little bit about this in African spirituality, a little bit about the chi, and in a very simple terms, he defined it as God within you, the divine reflected within you. And I thought that was just a very powerful interpretation of the concept, and very applicable to your work, right, into what you're doing and how you're utilizing fluorescent lights to illuminate transcendence. And I'm not a video gamer. However, I did a little research on Final Fantasy, and I mean, your inspiration in that, I literally got the aha moment. It made sense in how, Japanese video games and how they utilize light and illumination and sparkle, if you will, to give an essence of transcendence, that something significant is in this moment right now. And to begin to see that our identity, that there is something unique about us, not only individually, but corporately and collectively and universally, that we all are part of this greater story. I think your work really speaks to that. So, I just want to just commend you on how you use a very creative way to present that reality to us.
Yeah, and one thing connected just really quickly is that idea of also presenting divine mirrors of ourselves, right? Because, as your friend and colleague mentioned, within African spiritual systems, there's an understanding that we are all the divine, and the divine is inside of us. It's not this separation. We are also the divine. And so, for example, I've not studied extensively the Yoruba system, but one thing that I've learned a bit about is, for example, Oshun. And people describe Oshun always carrying a mirror with her. And in the kind of a modern context, people think about this mirror as this symbol of vanity. But what Oshun is doing is Oshun is constantly looking at this mirror and reflecting on her image as a god, right? And if you think about that, constantly reflecting on our images as the divine, how that transforms and affects the way in which we live our lives. And so I think that's also part of what my work is working to do, is literally, because even the image, like the images, when they're printed on these metal plates that are reflective, so people can also see themselves reflected in the work too, which is also part of that experience.
Yeah, Dr. B, can I just piggyback off what Mikael just said for a moment?
Yeah, sure.
I just, because he's, I'm over here like getting sweaty and excited, Mikael, as you're talking about when you start mentioning the concept that we're all divine mirrors, because I mean, in reality, from me, the when you deal with kind of an interpretation of the gospel or Christianity, to me, the incarnation, really what Christ reveals to all humanity, is that true fact of our identity, that we're all image bearers, that we're all reflectors. And if you really want to, from me, my understanding of the purpose of creation or humanity is to reflect, right, to mirror that divine image in the earth. So the concept of the kingdom of heaven is really the reality of all humanity, regardless of what you may believe. But every human being in our original goodness was created to reflect that divine image. And I think your work, brings back that truth, right, in a very creative way. And you do it in such a specific way. But what's true about your work is also true to me about everybody. Right? There's a truth in your work that's applicable not just to dark bodies, but also to everybody. And I think that's kind of the next level. That's the cosmic connection, if you will, about what your work speaks to me. And I really think it's fascinating. But it is true about that in the revelation of reflectors or mirrors. And I think that's a reality that I think is true, and an interpretation about the gospel that I don't believe is all well understood today. Because it's more about identity versus what you do.
Yeah. And it also extends beyond Christianity, because the world is full of people who believe in all kinds of things, who are looking for fulfillment. and seeing themselves whole. I mean, that's the whole point. I want to ask you a question about your work in Taiwan. I'm going to probably butcher the name of the school, but it was the school in Nanao, Aboriginal school.
Yeah, Nanao.
And you did a whole year curriculum. So people who are looking at your work, oh, that's great. It's art, it's photography. This had a really practical purpose. And as soon as I saw that, I thought to myself, minority and marginalized children all over this country can't see themselves in anything they're being taught. They can't see themselves. And you created a curriculum to help them to use what they know or what they should know or be taught, and photography to unveil something that would allow them to survive as a minority in this country. Did you say a little bit about that curriculum?
Yes, that's a really, because many people don't know about that project. That was my first photography project that I did right out of college. And actually, in the context of this conversation, it's really, really interesting because when I was a Fulbright scholar in Taiwan, and I was there teaching English, but I also was really curious about, again, cultural engagement. And I was teaching in a Taiwanese Aboriginal community. And so just for context for people, Taiwan has an indigenous community that's about 2% of the population. They are the ancestors of all Polynesian peoples. So from Hawaii to Indonesia to Madagascar, they originated in Taiwan several thousand years ago. And so they are kind of faced systemic discrimination, marginalization of their languages, their religions, their mythologies, are really endangered. I was positioned in one of these schools, and so I was thinking about how could I, as a photographer, engage with the students in a creative way. And I'd been studying the pedagogy of literacy through photography. And there's coming from Duke, there was a professor at the Center for Documentary Studies, Wendy Ewald, who'd done a lot of interesting work about teaching photography to students in different parts of the world as a way for them to engage questions of their identity. And so I collaborated with Dr. Christine Ye, who is a professor at the University of San Francisco, who'd also done work with Samoan communities, and she was doing research with the university Aboriginal students in Taiwan. And then, so Christine Ye, and then also two local teachers, Nancy Ye and Jennifer Lee. And together we collaborated with the students, these first and second graders, teaching them first the mythologies, right? Atayal mythologies. Because the myths are not really discussed, they're not taught within the context of the school. So we actually started by teaching them their mythologies, aspects of Atayal language. And from there, I then led the photography portion where I taught the students photography. Each of them were given disposable cameras and were then able to document and tell their stories of that in their community. We then took the portraits that they produced, blew them up in larger format, and then they adorned them with mythological symbols from their culture. So, for example, they adorned them with these diamonds around them, and all students kind of led. We kind of, allowed them, we kind of taught them the framework, and then they just took it and ran. So, for example, they adorned it with diamonds around it, which represent the eyes of their ancestors watching over them.
Wow.
They also adorned them with rainbow motifs. If you see some of the work that they produced, it's on my website. The rainbow motifs, that's also from their Atayal mythologies, and that's the rainbow bridge that they walk across to join their ancestors when they pass away. So again, this is bridge to the ancestors that goes through space.
Right. That
project was then compiled, and then the students were then featured in a full-floor exhibition at the National Taiwan Museum, exhibiting their work and sharing it with and then it toured across spaces across Taiwan. They got to then come to the capital and be showcased as the lead artists. And so that was just an incredible experience that, again, we began with mythology. And I think now I'm thinking back, I think also informs a lot of the work in terms of my own approach, kind of starting with mythology and then building identity-based projects around that.
Fantastic. You see any use for this in the curriculums across the United States?
I think definitely there is. I think it's definitely really needed because, right, I think when you start with actually teaching students their own indigenous mythologies, and then building creative projects where they're then implementing it within their daily lives and really building it out. I mean, it was really transformational for me. And I know a lot of the students, I mean, then they were then featured even in the museum in their community with their work. So that was, I think it does have a huge impact. Yeah.
Mikael, what about the significance of photography or the power of imagery or images, or the significance of seeing, right? Connectedness or seeing yourself in imagery. Can you speak to how that plays a role in transformation?
Yeah. One of the things I think is really interesting about photography is that people really believe that photographs represent objective reality and objective truth. People think, oh, because this is photographed, this is real. And so I think one of the things that is really powerful with the Infinite Essence series, for example, and with all of my work that I try to produce, is that when people see the work, they don't believe it's a photograph. They say, oh, this is a nice digital art, or this is a nice painting. And then when I explain actually how it's a photograph, I hand paint the model's bodies with the fluorescent paints, turn off the lights. I built an ultraviolet flash. The ultraviolet flash illuminates the bodies. That fluoresces the bodies. That's captured on the camera sensor. And then you see kind of people have this moment where they look at the work and they see something different, right? Because then it shifts from being this really abstract understanding of the human body to, this is a real human body. These are human beings. And when you see, I think that's just kind of like I guess like even a question for you too, kind of when you understood the work as, when you started to understand it as photograph versus seeing it as like a painting or digital art, I feel like there's a shift there. And I think that also is what challenges our perceptions of what's real and what our internal image of Blackness means and represents. And so I think that brings us back to that idea of the divine image, right? Because then that shifts us to then thinking about that cosmic divine image that's incarnated within us.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and the only way really to limit us is to pretend that the 4 dimensions we have access to are the only dimensions that there are.
Yeah.
And Michio Kaku and others say there are 11.
Wow.
Which means there's plenty of room for the Gede to rise, for the mythologies to exist, for us to breathe into the capacities that we really have. We are so limited.
Yeah.
And what I want, when I saw your work with Limitless Africans, was to understand that, yes, you were looking for the combination of queer and African, showing community. But what you did was showed us we also don't have limits, that we've limited ourselves. It's amazing. You also acted as your own model. You did yourself.
Oh, yeah.
I remember reading that you said it's kind of hard to paint yourself.
It is, if you can imagine.
I have no doubt. And so did you experience the same thing the models did? Or was it different for you? Because you know what's up.
Oh, my gosh. It was super different. It was so different. So for the Infinite Essence series, there was a local show, because I live in Pittsburgh, and there was a local show here queering the art of self-portraiture, and I'd been invited to be a part of the show. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna do the Infinite Essence series. I should probably do make a self-portrait for this thing, So it's like this whole production. It takes like a whole day. I set up a space. I have to put like black felt everywhere to kind of make it a really black background. And then I kind of have to block off the space in case anybody's walking around, because I have to, I strip down naked for the shoots. And so I'm there, and then I'm like painting my body with fluorescent paint. So I'm like taking it, I'm like splattering paint, like my head and trying to be like, wait, am I here? And like looking in mirrors and all of this stuff. So that took a whole lot of time. And then eventually I set up my camera on a tripod, and I just have it on a timer shooting out these ultraviolet flashes every maybe 30 seconds or something like that. And there was a few things that I noticed right away. First of all, from a sensorial experience, this is going to be kind of not as like elevated. It was so cold. You're like naked and it's dark and there's just like this light coming. So that was the first thing I experienced. I was like, it was so cold. I was like, oh, my body felt so cold. And then I started, like, when my eyes would be closed, I started noticing that every time the flash would emit, I would see this glow emerge and then disappear. I was like, And so then, because you can't look directly at the flash, I kind of would angle myself away and I would look down, and I would then see my arm just illuminate and then disappear. And I started thinking about that space again of gatekeepers and portals. And it was, we talked about the chi, kind of like the one ray of the infinitescence of the sun, I think like this divine image. And it was almost, I felt like I was, for that moment, because everything was black, it was completely dark. And then I would just kind of emerge and disappear. It was like walking into another dimension. And then if you see it come and then it goes away, it disappears. And from that perspective, that began shifting my understanding of what the work meant, because I know that some of the models had told me, that, for example, that some of them had cried seeing their images. Some of them had said how much it meant to them to see themselves as these celestial beings. But actually seeing it happen for myself was really, I think that's when it started to really click for me what the work was actually doing. And on a spiritual level for myself too, began also accelerating my own research into understanding that aspect of interdimensional travel, studying African indigenous systems like the Igbo system and the Dogon system to understand, what was going on there, right? Because I know our indigenous knowledge systems understand that and understand what this work is meant to do and how it is operating even through that fire of the flash emerging and creating this image and then disappearing and back into the blackness. And so that's kind of what started for me. From that self-portrait.
Wow. You also mentioned hearing from an African American woman, a woman who's thick, like most of us, are.
Yes.
And saying how difficult it was to deal with her own body until she saw that. And it really struck me because most of the time I've been trying to look like what I've seen. On the television, on the ads. And it wasn't until an African American woman said to me, elephants don't eat anything but leaves. And they weigh tons. Stop it. You're gullah. You're going to be thick, whatever. And to be able to see the beauty of self internally, not just what size you are, was just breathtaking. So.
Wow. I recall seeing the diversity in your models, and hearing you talk about your own experience as a model reminded me of one of your interviews. One of your models said that every Black person should see themselves this way. It was a powerful statement, how the model interpreted their experience and how that experience was transformative and transformational, and how they saw themselves and their identity. And I started thinking, it's like, well, wow, yeah, everybody, but everyone should see themselves that way, right? To be able to see, not only experience it as a model, but to experience it as someone who can appreciate the artwork. And I think that, that unique aspect of your work, a participant, but also an appreciator, someone who is appreciating, an observer of your work, can also experience that transformational reality and truth of your work too. So there's an underlying story that really evangelizes, if you will, individuals who encounter the work. And I just find that to be so powerful, a powerful aspect of the imagery that you're doing. And it speaks to really identity. I mean, so much, and that's kind of the interconnectedness of humanity. Is this journey to rediscover who we really are, right? And so much of our life is trying to uncover that, and we go through, our tribalistic identity formations. But there is a universal connection there too, and then your work really speaks to that at a higher level. And I just think that it kind of leads me to say, what's the next iteration of this work? What is this work going to look like 10 years from now? You know what I mean? Where do you see the work going?
So I'll respond to a few different pieces. So I might kind of like jump around a little bit. First of all, starting with what Dr. Barbara Holmes was discussing was, one of the models for the project is named Uche, who is like a full-figured, curvy person. And Uche's image is like really, really powerful. Uche was assigned female at birth, identifies as genderqueer. And Annette, one of the responders for my article in NPR, was a 60-year-old Black woman who emailed me and said that, her whole 60 years, she hated her body. And that for a fraction of a second, when she saw that image of Uche, she actually felt like she could like breathe. She had like a moment of reprieve. Wow. And so I feel like that's a really powerful symbol of what the work is capable of doing from that standpoint. The other piece that I wanted to actually share was actually one of the Dogon myths of origin, talking about these cosmic connections, etc. And so in the Dogon system, one at the beginning of the universe, all was one in the blackness of space. Mm-hmm. And one of the divinities, the Nomosemi, was sacrificed to atone for the deeds of his wicked twin. And as he sacrificed, his blood forms all of the planets and the stars. And so ritual sacrifice is this generative force that creates the physical universe. He's then resurrected by Amma, the creator god. And as he's resurrected, he turns with his arms and demonstrates his role as the guardian of space as the stars kind of spool forth from his body. And that divine figure then becomes the ancestor of all humanity, right? And so you think about that actually within the Dogon system, we're all descended from the gods, right? And so that Nomo then descends to Earth in a celestial arc from the constellation of Sirius with all the plants and animals and the first 8 ancestors of humanity. He steps onto Earth, and as he steps onto Earth as the ancestor of all humanity, he brings water to the planet. And so from that perspective, I think there's a few pieces. First, it's this celestial connection, literally humanity from this Dogon indigenous system being described as divine creatures that descend from the constellation of Sirius to the planet, right? So again, there's literally this divine connection, this cosmic connection that's within our blood that's there, and which I think also is evoked in some of the images in the project, and I think is also central to these understandings of this divine nature that's rooted in Blackness, and that then is generated throughout humanity. The piece in terms of, okay, what is coming next? Actually in the fall, in September, I am going to have a new series of Infinite Essence images being released in September. I'm going to have my first solo gallery show in New York City, in Chelsea, in September. So if anybody's around, it's going to be from September 17th. It's not been officially announced yet, but announcement's coming very, very soon. So if people follow me, they can figure it out. But it's going to be September 17th, October 30th, a full solo exhibition with a whole new suite of images that are dedicated specifically to Dogon myths of origins and Igbo myths of origin. And so this new series is titled Cosmologies and will be coming out then. And it will also be accompanied by my first film, which will also be in the space. And so it will be kind of Infinite Essence in motion, but dedicated to the Odachi Nne Ebere Igbo myth of origin that's rooted in dance, sacrifice, and resurrection. So there's going to be a film coming out and a new series in September. And then if people are not able to make it to that in New York, there will also be a solo show in Los Angeles in November, also about to be announced.
Wow.
Breaking news. Fantastic.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Wow. That is wonderful. I think what I like about your spirit is that you're so grounded. You know who you are. You know who you're hearing from. You're understanding what the ancestors are whispering into your ear. And there's this quote where you said, very few American liberals cared about my work on LGBTQ immigrants when Obama was in office. Mm-hmm. And then when Trump was elected, everybody was whispering in your ear, oh, this is very important work, very important work, very needed, very needed. And you said, important to who?
I did say that. I did.
Important to who? These stories matter no matter what, regardless of the white gaze or the cis gaze or whoever gaze.
Right.
It matters.
Yeah.
And you know that. And because you know that, I feel stronger about reclaiming it and inviting all brothers and sisters to reclaim who they really are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful.
What makes you so brave?
Oh my gosh. I was irritated then. I was irritated.
I know you were. That's what I liked about it.
I was so mad. I was like,
somebody had got on your last nerve.
Oh my gosh, I just couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't. That was hilarious. So what happened? What happened was that when I started the Limitless African series, I started in 2013. So this is the Obama era. You know, everyone's like, oh, you know, everything's great. Da, 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 da. What is going on? So most of the traction actually that I got around the series was in like Canada. I started even having stuff in Europe, but America was just in this place. Oh, everything. It's just very, very, very blinders on. Oh, we have Obama. Like it was ridiculous. And so then Trump is elected. And then cause I had to be traveling to like Canada, like a lot, trying to build, like do little shows here and do this stuff. And when Trump was elected, then suddenly like a lot more interest started developing in the work. And so I think it really shows, you know, and I think even with pop culture, you know, how things move so quickly, you know, so I think it requires that an understanding of the mission for the work and my mission, right? Because, you know, even with, you know, the Infinite Essence series, you know, even if people like it right now, some people might be, oh, something else is hot, like 2 years from now. Oh, I like this. And I think that's why the framework for both Astro Black mythology has been so important for me, because I understand by grounding my work in these celestial mythologies that is actually, it's a healing process for me, but it also is connected to our artistic practices that we've thought about for thousands of years, right? So even if these little trends and stuff are going like this, we're still looking at the pyramids. Mm-hmm. Right. We're still talking about the Great Zimbabwe. Like it's a different level of thinking about work and how that connects us to the divine. So
the late womanist theologian, her name is Katie Geneva Cannon, said everyone has to do the work that their soul must have. Is this the work that your soul must have?
Absolutely. I've never heard that quote before, but absolutely. There have been times when, you know, it's very challenging. You know, it's been very, very challenging. Even becoming a full-time artist was such a transition, right? Because even when I began the Limitless African series, I had a full-time job. And I would still be like, okay, once a month, I'm going to photograph. I'm traveling to see somebody. I was working in marketing, very, very, very different roles and different paths that were open. I've always thought about kind of completely different careers. And one thing that somebody told me like years ago when I was at Duke was that in every job, there's quote unquote drudgery. She said, oh, 95% of every job is drudgery. And there's 5% that you be like, and I was like, that sounds pretty bad. I was like writing college. I was like, I don't like that ratio. Right. But now actually here, it's like, okay, actually like with a lot of my work, I have so much like administration, so much, all this stuff, but all of it makes me so excited.
Yeah.
All of it makes me so excited because I know that I'm having an opportunity to share the stories and mythologies of my ancestors. And I think it's so necessary. I mean, particularly right now, I think it's always necessary. But I think because we are so far been stripped and so far pushed away. I mean, even my family members in Nigeria, the research that I'm doing on like Igbo mythologies, Dogon mythologies, but specifically even the Igbo ones, my Igbo family members do not know these myths. So even our families, literally who grew up in Nigeria, do not know our own stories of origin as a people. And so it really gives me a sense of mission and drive to keep producing the work and to keep finding new avenues through film, through additional media, to immerse audiences in these divine stories that we contain within ourselves and that connect us to our ancestors and to the origin of the universe. So I think that's really what drives me and keeps me going.
Thank you, Mikael.
Thank you, Mikael.
This has been a wonderful time.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening, and we'd like to leave you with a few reflections on this segment with Mikael Owunna.
You know, Dr. B, in the interview, Mikael spoke very elegantly and eloquently about his origin stories, his discovery of his stories of origin within his family. And so much of how he articulated it was connected to his discovery of his identity. But he mentioned how, as he began to have these conversations with his family, many of his family did not really know these stories of origin. And it made me really think about how many of us in our communities around this country, many of us do not know our own stories of origin. And as he began to explore and talk about his particular, gift to this world and what he does, it really brought to light how oftentimes these very non-traditional, ways of learning through art and through media and through music, through poetry, can have to be tools to help us discover our own particular stories of origin and ultimately our own identity.
Yes, you're not going to learn about the magic within, the star stuff within from your colleges and universities. There has to be a moment of tracing back, of reclamation of story, of understanding who you are. I know that when our own family did the DNA and found ourselves clearly situated on the continent, we began the exploration of rituals, story, culture, the admixture of other ethnic groups. It grounds you, it settles you, it prepares you, and allows you to do the work that you're here on earth to do. Often our differences with others is that we have not yet seen the magic within. So that's what I'm looking for. What is your story? Who were your indigenous elders? What stories did they tell? Where's the magic in your life?